Morning, everybody. We've got members joining the participants panel. I believe we're just waiting for a couple more people, but let me see. 1, 2, 3. Morning, everybody. We've got quorum.
All right, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome back to the Task Force on Corporate Landlords. So today is our informational hearing. Ariana, do we need to do like a roll call or anything?
We do not need to do attendance or a
Okay.
roll call.
All right. Well, the first thing on the agenda is quick remarks by the chair. So one update that Jeff and I have is that we did reach out to the Housing Committee co-chairs and vice chairs and asked for an extension of time to write the report since we were originally told to have it by the Public Act in by January 1st. And so they agreed that January 23rd would be a deadline that would work for them and give them enough time to consider our findings and recommendations before the short session coming up. Jeff, did you have any other updates before we get started?
No, this is great. I'm looking forward to today.
So the way we're going to do this is we have 4 presenters, and they're each going to speak for about 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll have, an additional 10 minutes or so for questions for that speaker, so 20 minutes total. And then, at the end, we'll just check and see about drafting and when to have our next meeting. So our first presentation is going to be from Mad Bankson, who is a senior housing research and campaign coordinator with the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. And I believe they have a PowerPoint, and then we'll have time to ask them some questions.
I'm just going to set that up for them.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for having me. I'm looking forward to presenting here. While we're waiting, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. Hey, everybody, my name is Mad Bankson. I work at an organization called the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. We're a watchdog nonprofit that seeks to uplift the voices of folks who are impacted by private equity. So we work in 5 different issue areas, and housing is one of them. So I'm our senior housing researcher today, and I'm based in Richmond, Virginia. I'm seeing this on the screen. I don't think this is mine, unfortunately.
This is what
One moment, please.
Take your time. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Like I said, my name is Mad Bankson. I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about private equity in housing. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a couple particular policy pieces. So that's limiting corporate landlord portfolio sizes as well as tenant opportunity to purchase. I'll close out by talking quickly about public pension funds because that feels like part of the process. Thank you. Next slide, please. I just wanted to flag for everybody, I assume I was invited today because I led the creation of this report series looking at different potential mechanisms for regulating corporate landlords. This was written during when a lot of legislation was being introduced in 2023 and 2024. It's much more detailed than what I'll speak about today, and it has a lot of case studies that you can look at as jumping off points if you're interested in creating legislation. Just to start, I think we all have a baseline understanding of the problem, but I'll just say it quickly. PE firms and large corporate landlords that are similar are quickly acquiring housing, and they're consolidating the housing stock into the hands of an ever smaller number of powerful corporations. This is bad for tenant agency and dignity. I could give a whole presentation about why it's bad. In short, I think these actors are especially profit driven in a way that really impacts tenant safety and security, and they're very influential because they work at large scales and have a lot of economic and political access. That being said, every type of landlord can be and often is exploitative, and I think that policy should respond to that accordingly. So we've heard a lot about this issue in single family homes. I also want to say that these policies should apply to every sector. I want to not forget about our friends in multifamily and subsidized and manufactured housing as well. So there are a lot of different things we can do to mitigate corporate impacts, and a lot of them are just implementing basic tenant protections, right? So you already know about just cause and habitability standards and a lot of these things. Connecticut is on it with that stuff. I'm going to focus today instead about mechanisms for limiting how many rental homes they can own or operate, TOPA, and then investor standards. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think one of sort of a more simple way to limit corporate landlord portfolio sizes is through landlord licensing. It seems like a few municipalities in Connecticut are already doing some landlord licensing, so this is a really great start. I'm not an expert, but that's kind of what I found. So we can actually use landlord licensing as a way to cap the number of properties that any single landlord can operate. So licensing, if you're not familiar, is a legal requirement that makes landlords get approval before they can lease properties. So a city theoretically could use this to limit the number of licenses any one entity is able to own. So this would prevent monopolization. You could say you can't have more than 50 licenses in this area. This is a really similar legal logic to what's been used to regulate short-term rentals in places like Atlanta, New Orleans, Wilmington, North Carolina. It does see some legal challenges, but overall, this is a pretty solid potential legal mechanism for folks to use to decrease consolidation. It also has the added bonus that it kind of dovetails really well with requiring the compliance of habitability standards. So if corporate landlords are kind of very likely to not be in compliance with habitability issues, like more so than other types of landlords in some cases. So it's easy to pull a license if they are kind of found to be systematically violating that. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'm going to talk about limiting portfolio sizes. I apologize, I'm moving quickly here. The most direct way to handle this housing consolidation issue is like similar to the licensing thing that I'm talking about, but it's a little separate. So our problem is that corporations own too many houses. That's simply, like, obviously it's much more complex than that, but that is the root of the problem. Houses and apartments. So I think the best solution is to make it so that they don't do that, if that is the setup of the problem. I don't know if you can tell yet, I'm not a scholar of constitutional law, the degree to which I am simplifying that. But I think the most direct way to deal with this consolidation issue is to straight up place these caps on how many properties an entity can own. Unfortunately, so far, case law often has decided that it's not constitutional to block a corporation or a person from either buying or owning property. So we have to kind of like get around that. So how do we get around that? So how do we discourage landlords then from operating large rental portfolios if we can't keep them from owning them? So it's not to ban them, but more to place limits on that acquisition beyond a certain threshold, with the goal of making amassing huge amounts of real estate less profitable and thereby less attractive. So you can own it, but you can't make heaps of money off of raising rent and evicting people. So this effectively is going to remove the attractiveness of that investment. So there's several different types of bills that have been introduced on this. I don't know that any of them have passed, but they use kind of various different methods. So there was a North Carolina one that wanted to cap the number of single family homes at 100 in the most populous counties. So investors that would exceed that cap would have to pay $100 per day, plus fees and damages. That bill did not require them to sell the properties purchased prior to that passage. So they would get to keep what they already have. It was made to stop acquisition, right? There was an Ohio bill that sought to levy a similar sort of monthly tax of $1,500 on these mega home investors over a certain size within the state. So that's kind of one piece, is charging them if they're going to continue to own a certain number of homes. There have also been some federal movements along these lines. So Adam Smith's Saving Homes from Acquisition by Private Equity, or SHAPE Act, proposed to levy a real estate transfer tax equal to the property's sale price for a large firm that are buying single family homes. There was a similar Merkley Act and the Hedge Fund Control of Housing Act that charged firms for $20,000 any properties over 100, and also would require them to sell 10% of their portfolio per year until they meet that 100 cap. So given where we are politically right now, none of these bills are making it very far, but I'm still meeting with a lot of people, folks like y'all, and also congressional staffers who are quietly putting things together, hoping kind of for more favorable conditions. Again, I want to say a lot of this legislation has focused on single family homes. It has to apply to apartments and manufactured housing as well. The people who live in those homes deserve this type of protection as well. It's often framed as an issue for homeowners or would-be homeowners, but we want to make sure that renters of large landlords are served as well by these type of protections. And obviously this faces a lot of oppositions from landlord, but it is probably the most visionary and direct way of dealing with this. Next slide, please. Okay, tenant opportunity to purchase, also known as right of first refusal. This is the legal right to purchase the home you live in when it goes up for sale. I think I'm not an expert on this particular policy mechanism. I think that we'll maybe hear more about it today. I wanted to just say that it is a common sense policy. It's especially important in manufactured housing. I'm hearing that Connecticut already has that in place, which is really great. Usually I cite Colorado, but it's good to hear other people are working on that as well. And the reason that is really important is because rents go up so much following a corporate acquisition, and we want people to be able to stay in the place where they maybe have lived for a long time, or maybe even have a manufactured home that they aren't able to move. This is an extremely politically viable policy. Home ownership is a bipartisan issue. It's common sense. If you have paid rent for a long time in one place, you should be able to take that over. Next slide, please. So why is it necessary? Well, corporate buyers have the upper hand, right? So they're using prop tech, property technology, that they use both for acquisition purposes and for management. They have algorithms that can locate properties within seconds of a listing. They have access to huge amounts of debt and capital to be able to purchase these things. Often they are purchasing them from each other in large portfolio bundles, and tenants and regular people simply cannot compete. And then also because tenants deserve to control the places where they live. So it's common sense from sort of a technical legal standpoint, but also from a sort of like rights and democracy basis, it makes sense. Okay, one last slide here and I'll wrap up. Public pension funds and private equity. So I just wanted to make a really quick note about public pension fund systems. PE is getting about 1/3 of its funding from public pension funds. And I think with that, it's fair to say they have some responsibility in some of these negative impacts that we see from private equity and housing. I think there is a fiduciary concern in funding the companies that make life harder for working people and retirees. So the Connecticut retirement system has almost $7 billion invested in private equity. That's about 11% of the portfolio as of 2024. This may have changed slightly. Including investments from Carlyle and Landmark, which are both private equity firms who have seen a lot of tenant organizing and advocacy around commonplace corporate landlord related issues in recent years. If people are interested in that, I'm happy to provide more information at a later time. So what we see in a lot of cases, and I'm not commenting on Connecticut specifically, but is that private equity engages with tenants in a way that's pretty exploitative, sometimes even illegal, and we don't see a lot of consequences. And when it comes time to raise money for the next fund, the public pension fund systems are giving the money, but it doesn't have to be like so automatic that will happen, right? So this is where we advocate for investment standards that ensure that the pension fund system only financially contributes to companies that are following those simple guidelines for reducing risk. So New York City is one example for property management standards. That's a very good starting point. It's not legally binding. But I think having some penalties in place for compliance and making a basic framework there can go a long way with making sure that your investment serves the people it's supposed to. Thank you. That's all. Next slide. Just got my email listed up there. Right.
Thank you so much, Mad. I think we have like 9 minutes for questions. Maybe, Ariana, if you could maybe stop screen sharing so we can see each other. All right, well, I guess I can't see the other folks, but if people just want to unmute if they have a question or...
Yeah, Mad, this is Representative Nick Menapes. Thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was really informative. I had a couple questions, but I'll leave it with just the one now so we can get to everyone, which is that when it comes to a lot of the, you talked about some of the penalties that have been put in for the large scale ownership of single family houses, which is admittedly a huge problem and is just going to get worse and worse. But I know that we've had a lot of essentially fear from individual homeowners about that this will like negatively affect them and that they will somehow be penalized using this too. I wasn't sure if you had any insight of what we can do to essentially reassure people and make sure this legislation doesn't affect the person who is owning their individual house, because I can just see it now where people are going to come in and say that, oh, you're going to put a new tax on our houses, which obviously isn't the intent or the desire of the bill. But can you speak to what other places have tried to do to prevent that type of, I suppose, misinformed opinion?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think I would want to hear a little more about the specific concern, but I think it's pretty easily assuaged by just the thing is that these only apply to people who own a certain number of houses. So we have seen as low as 4, as high as 100. So it's really only for very large landlords. I think that the policy itself is quite straightforward and doesn't impact individuals. So I think from there it becomes sort of a communications thing. I think that people are familiar with this issue. And if you read a lot of the press, the way that these bills have been talked about, it's often sort of framed as targeting mega landlords, making homeownership more accessible, perhaps even in some cases using some of those funds to fund affordable housing. So specifically making it really clear that you're talking about deconsolidation of people who will never live in these homes. We're not even talking about small landlords here.
Yeah. And just to follow up with that, is your view of this, is this coming from these types of fines? Because I very much understand what you're doing, and I totally agree, but I'm wondering if this is coming from essentially legislation would be to help municipalities do this, and it's by charging people who own more than 4 houses within the town, or is it coming from the state level in other places? Because I mean, there just ends up being different aspects we'd have to approach it. One of the things I have is if we did something like this in the state, I don't know how that goes with the fiscal guardrails. It would have to change. But if it's something in the municipality, it becomes much harder to enforce, because if they own 10 houses and they all happen to be spread out, then maybe it's the same. Again, someone acquiring 10 houses is not usually the same private equity thing. We're looking at much larger scales, but still, someone could potentially own 169 different homes in the towns if every municipality has a restriction on this, and it would still not quite get there. So I was hoping you might be able to speak to that.
Yeah, totally. So I'm not a taxation or legal scholar. So there's a couple different ways. I would say ideally this is, especially for a place as small as Connecticut, this is something that is managed at the state level, primarily because of the way that states are able to levy taxes that is considerably different from municipalities. I have thought about doing this through kind of a property taxes angle or how that would be administered. if you're wanting to limit on the local level, that's where that first piece that I was talking about comes in through the sort of licensing process and limiting the amount of licenses that will be offered. I think that's probably like the easiest, quickest mechanism. That being said, because these landlords are operating on a large scale, I always encourage legislation of this at as large of a scale as you can get. So ideally state, or like really ideally federal. There's also this whole other component of the question of like, well, who owns what and how do we know? Because they're all hiding behind these shell corporations and they operate in all these like different areas. So there's sort of like a transparency and ownership tracking component that is sort of the baseline of all of this as well that I didn't even get into today. But that's something that you could look at as well for your state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Thanks so much, Mad. I thought first your summary of constitutional law was wonderful and short, and lawyers are overrated. So thank you for that. I just want to make sure as well that we have a copy of your slides going forward. I appreciated in particular your sort of survey of policy responses, because that's ultimately going to be where we're heading.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have the slides. Most of this content is also well documented in that report series, which I can make sure to send as well to Ariana.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
And for a quick note for everyone, after our meeting today, I will be publishing all of these presentations to the task force webpage. I can relink that at the end of this meeting as well, but all of the slides will be able to be on viewed on the task force webpage.
Perfect. I only had one other question. It was just beyond. Yeah, I was just curious about the resistance that you've seen to these kinds of proposals. If it's besides private equity themselves, have you seen whether it's realtors or another sort of common group, lobbying group or special interest group that's opposed to these kinds of policies?
Yeah, interestingly, the realtors are often strange bedfellows with me on this. They do not resist this. They like the deconsolidation because it gives more opportunities for them to do their jobs and make money. I think a lot of the opposition that we see, I mean, I think you could say that it's political ideological, so not having sort of any market interventions, but I mean, I think it's landlords are highly influential, both like kind of interpersonally, but also in terms of campaign finance. So they do kind of operate to oppose these sort of things. And this is where I'm like, the corporate landlord versus like maybe larger local landlord often have similar business interests and will kind of work in industry associations together as well. I've written a report about national scale industry associations and some of their political influence that I can send to Ariana as well for you. But it's also on our website. It's called Who is Behind the Curtain is the name of it.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think we have time for one last question. All right, well, thank you so much, Mad. I really appreciate it.
Sarah, I
Oh,
believe
I
that
think
John had
Oh,
a
is there one
question.
more? Sorry. I can't see it. Sorry, who was it?
I'm sorry, Sarah. I guess I was mistaken. I thought someone was raising their hand up.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mad. And next we're going to
Thanks,
hear
Jen.
from Nora Goslin from the Cooperative Development Institute in Massachusetts.
Hi, good morning. How long when should I make sure to stop talking? Just out of interest.
So we have allocated 20 minutes per person, so
Sounds
just
good.
leaving some time for questions.
And I sent over some slides. Oh, thank you. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invite to come join the meeting this morning. I've worked with Dave for a couple years now, and would love to, I'll kind of cover a little bit of similar topics as Mad, specifically around right of first refusal laws. And then I know Greg will talk more about. I'll kind of tee up maybe some other legislative efforts that I think he'll talk about more next. I'm going to be mostly just focused on manufactured housing, but I think this is relevant, as Mad said, to expanding to other types of multifamily housing, but this is specific to manufactured housing. So my name's Nora Goslin, and I'm the Director of Resident Acquisitions for a nonprofit called the Cooperative Development Institute, or CDI. I actually live in Providence, Rhode Island, but I work throughout New England. So I work from Maine to Connecticut. And we, as a nonprofit, we don't have a brick and mortar. We're spread out throughout all these states because we have clients in all these states. So we serve all of New England except New Hampshire. We have a cooperative business agricultural side where we help employees purchase the companies they work for, generally small businesses, from the employer. And then we have a cooperative housing program, which we call the New England Resident-Owned Communities Program, which is just focused on getting manufactured housing into resident ownership. So in this model and in this program, we've done this with 65 different communities, manufactured housing communities across New England. As of this time next month, that will be 66. I'm working with a group in Foxborough, Mass. That's going to buy their park a mile from Gillette. And you'll see this kind of breakdown of how much work we've done in each state. And you'll notice that there is a big difference between the one group that we've supported in Connecticut and the 31 that we've supported in Massachusetts. And the only reason for this is not because the communities are different or residents are not interested by any means. It's because of laws like an opportunity to purchase or a right of first refusal, which have existed in Massachusetts since 1986 and did not exist in Connecticut to apply to all sales of a mobile home park until 2023, thanks to Dave and others. So, this spread out across these 65 communities, it's over 6,500 homes and over 300 million in financing. And you can see that it's a wide range of community sizes. So there's no one size fits all for resident ownership. The biggest community that we've worked with is 430 homes. The smallest is 9. So it's a very flexible type of cooperative home ownership. Do you want to head to the next one? These are just some pictures. I love it's very exciting when people get the banner at the end of the process. By that point, they've worked for 6-8 months. It's been tough. We've gone through, I liken it to driving a sports car very quickly or drinking from a fire hose. And it's an intense process. You're going through both a commercial real estate acquisition and a cooperative development process. So the feeling and the celebration that people have at the end of this when they can say that they have collectively come together and bought their community is really incredible. The communities we work with, folks are homeowners, so they own their manufactured home and they have previously rented from a park owner. So it's a land lease model, and through resident ownership, they are forming a cooperative or an association, depends on the state we're incorporating them in. And that cooperative or association is purchasing the land in common and all common infrastructure. So they get the sign that says we own it at the end. And you'll see these are communities and residents from Brookfield, Massachusetts, from Bangor, Maine, from Charlestown, Rhode Island. So really across New England. Hop to the next slide. So speaking of, it's formatted a little funky, but I wanted to show this chart to give a sense of, how many communities are we talking in the states that we work in? And I'll focus on Connecticut. So Connecticut has 186 manufactured housing communities, of which, did someone say something? Okay. Of which 3 are resident owned. So not that many resident owned just yet because the law is relatively new, only 2 years old. So there's one in Colchester, there's one in Milford, and there's one in Danbury, which is 1% of all the manufactured housing communities. And I would say that these numbers obviously come from the state list, but hats off to Dave, who went line by line through each one of these parks and figured out who owns it. I've done the same work for Mass and Rhode Island, and it's no easy feat. It is extremely time consuming. And looking at that data set, we can tell that about 36 are owned by these private equity or real estate investment trusts. And that would leave about 101 what we would consider eligible or good candidates for resident ownership, which means they're over 25 homes. They're not already resident owned. we have found that 25 and under is a little bit hard for the resident ownership model in terms of sustainability and people power. And then the law in Connecticut, the right of first refusal, is only applicable to communities that are 15 homes or larger. So just at the bottom here, I just wanted, and I think probably Greg will talk about this as well, the one word that we would use to describe what's happened in the manufactured housing industry in the last decade is consolidation, same as all housing stock and all sectors, right? But we had this really multi-generational family owners, mom and pops, who, you know, maybe the grandparent built the park in the 50s or 60s, and then a generation or two owned it, and they are now getting their phones ringing off the line from brokers, from, you know, upstart, like, I'm going to put together some funds and I'm going to go be a mobile home park owner, because they're looking at things like Mobile Home Park University and whole YouTube channels talking about how to make a quick buck off of manufactured housing. And they have flooded into the sector. They see it as lucrative. They see it as recession proof. They are not responsible for what's inside the home, and mobile homes are not mobile. So that has really changed the market. And you'll see that I gave a little bit of reference point for the impact that that has had on pricing from Massachusetts, where we have better data. When we were doing this 15 years ago, the average price per home site was about $26,000. And today it's between 70 and 80. And that's really from last year. This year, the average has been about $85,000 to $90,000 per home site, which is, you know, at 300% increase in pricing, with the extremes. The most expensive I've seen was in just outside Boston, $155,000 a home site. And it's worth noting in Connecticut that you have some of the largest parks in New England, similar to Maine. And so you have the big real estate investment trusts, which would be like your RHP and your Sun Communities, which Dave could tell you better than me. And you can hop to the next slide, please. I'll pick it up a little bit, but generally speaking, this is a slide I use when I start working with a group of residents for the very first time. I need to see a bucket and a visual. It kind of has helped me and has helped me explain it to folks. I go in and meet with groups and they've just gotten a sale notice. So they know their park is for sale, and it's scary and it's unexpected, and generally speaking, no one wants to deal with it. And it always comes at the worst time, like a holiday in my experience. And so what I do is I show up and CDI, this is kind of what our work is, and say, you know, if you're interested, these laws exist. You would be doing something that many hundreds of other communities and residents have done before you. They have to have the interest, right? I'm not interested in dragging anyone through a resident purchase process, because if you didn't want to do it from the get-go, you're not going to want to do it in 5 years when you're fighting about, you know, a well or a septic project. But the idea is that, you know, your money stays in your community and you have that control. Whereas in a commercially owned park, again, not the case generally with mom and pops, when there was pride in ownership and investment in the community we see, but certainly in the case with private equity and real estate investment trusts, that money is not staying in the park to upgrade the quality of life in the systems. It's being yanked out for shareholders, for profit. You could jump to the next one. So I won't go too into this, but if it's of interest, just for you to have the slide deck, this is how, again, I pull this from materials I use when I meet with new groups for the first time of residents, but this is the structure of a resident-owned community. An example would be the one group we've worked with in Connecticut is Ryder Woods in Milford. So, you know, they have a board of directors, they function like a small town with a membership. Everyone is encouraged and welcome to join that membership. It's entirely volunteer run, and nothing about the way someone would buy or sell a home in the park changes. They still pay the one monthly rent amount. That rent amount goes into a pot, and it pays for the operating costs, and it pays for the mortgage costs, which is fixed. So there's that control and that stability. Any group that we work with, we generally, as a requirement of the lending, require them to have professional third-party property management, which is not always the case. I know the resident-owned community in Colchester is self-managed. It can work, but it's a good protection for brand new resident-owned parks to not be self-managed in our experience. Hop to the next one. And the next one is really talking about, okay, what does this look like? Like, why do we promote this? Why is this good in addressing corporate takeover of housing stock? Is because we see controlled rent improved infrastructure, and an empowered community. So some examples on this chart are from parks in Massachusetts that are over 10 years old. So you can really see an operating history there of what their rent was at the time of purchase versus what it is. This is from 2023, but within the last 1-2 years, their rents have gone up, anywhere from $4 in that decade to $32 in that decade. In Maine, some examples I pulled out was, resident-owned parks that we worked with in 2012, that at the time of purchase, their rent was $270 today, or last year, was $355, whereas the market around them, with the influx of companies like what you have in Connecticut, have driven up that area market rent to $795. That's absurd. People also have their mortgage, right? People also have their bills. Most of the people living in communities are retirees living on $1,200, $1,500 a month. So that $800 in rent is not tenable. In Connecticut, an example is that when Ryder Woods purchased in 2009, their rent was $400. Today it's $450. And that is a $40 increase they just put into effect. So they've had a $50 change over more than 15 years of resident ownership. That's unheard of, right, in the private equity owned communities where rent can be in Connecticut up to $800, $900. Okay, I'll hop to the next slide. Someone cut me off if I'm talking too long, because I'll keep it rolling. So I just wanted to touch on that. We're a local, regional, nonprofit doing this work, but this is actually a national movement that you may have heard of, Rock USA. Rock USA, different national nonprofit. They have local affiliates that are independent nonprofits focused just on our necks of the wood. So there are 356 resident-owned communities set up this way. So there's a real track record that goes back to 1984 in Meredith, New Hampshire. 40 years of these groups buying their parks, running them successfully. So when we work in new states and people look at us like we're coming in with something bananas and ludicrous, we can point to this is a real model that has worked across the country. So you can hop to the next one. The next slides are me being an absolute in the weeds on all these different opportunity to purchase and right of first refusal laws. I'm not going to go through all these slides. I just figured might be useful to have it in one place. The gist of the next 4 or 5 slides is just what each state in New England has for these laws. These are the #1 protection, in my personal opinion, in getting things resident owned. The model, the template is in New Hampshire. That is the oldest law in the country. It's from 1980. Other New England states have laws that date from the late 80s or early 90s. Opportunity to purchase used to be completely fine with getting residents into resident ownership, back when mostly it was a local owner selling to another local owner. Not the case anymore. As Greg can tell you, and we dealt with for the last 2 years in Maine, an opportunity to purchase got passed there in 2023, and we had groups putting in competitive offers and getting rejected because they were competing against private equity companies, and there was a lot of, my personal opinion, biased against resident groups and the feasibility of this. If you want to just hop to the Connecticut slide, that's Mass, Maine. So Connecticut, and I worked with Dave and Rafi and other folks in 2023 to get this law lifted, and I know Dave and Rafi did a lot of negotiating with the Park Owners Association at the time, and we were pulling from all the other New England states and our experience there. But this law, one thing I would say that could be solved, and I know Dave's already working on it, is closing the hybrid part of this law. We got it passed, or it got passed in 2 years ago, that it was a right of first refusal for all transactions that are not portfolio transactions. That was needed at, I feel at the time, to get the law passed, and Dave and I have talked a lot about it. But we ran into an issue in Norwich earlier this year where a portfolio of 7 parks, one park wanted to put in an offer and they were rejected because it's an opportunity to purchase and not a right of first refusal for their instance. And you just mind keeping going?
Yeah, we've got till 11:45 if you want to wrap up, if there's time
right
for questions.
on. You want to just click through. So that's what makes an effective right of first refusal or opportunity to purchase law. You can just keep clicking through. And then I kind of give a slide about what happens when a park goes up for sale, just in case that's of interest. And I think the last slide is just what I would say, the one right after this. What supports resident ownership? We already talked about strong right of first refusal laws, legislation that dissuades consolidation. I think Greg's going to talk about a really incredible thing that happened in Maine this last session. Low-cost financing and grants. CHAFA already has a loan product that's been untested, but grants and low-cost financing are what make this affordable. Good data collection. As Mad said, we need to know who owns what. And then attorneys and legal services. We have very commonly ended up in court with resident groups fighting for their right of first refusal, and having legal resources that are available and at low or no cost is invaluable, because otherwise we can't fight these private equity tactics. 4 minutes for questions, sorry.
Thank you so much, Nora. So folks just want to unmute because I can't see if anyone has their hand raised. Representative Metapace.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. That was really informative, and I really appreciated your presentation. I did just have one question about this, which is, how do you think is the best way? Because you talked a lot about organizing the people within the communities, and we were wondering, is like, what kind of tools can we offer to the municipalities so that they kind of can help people? I mean, I'm hopeful that any municipality is going to try and help keep their communities, like these communities, grounded and local. And on top of that, I was hoping if you had any recommendations for anything that the state could do as well.
I think definitely municipalities and towns are good allies in this. Code enforcement and boards of health are sometimes the first people to know if a park's being sold or what's going on in a community. So I love the idea of like resources maybe hosted on a state site, or like sessions that could be held to do like informational for code enforcement and board of healths in different towns about resident ownership. I think DCP taking a more proactive, and I would look at Dave for this role in, getting these resources out about resident ownership, promoting it, and promoting like that CHAFA has, acquisition loan product that we were in conversation with them about for 3 or 4 years ago and developing. So I think that type of thing is definitely like information sessions, making these resources available on a state site about the law, about the financing available, all would be really good in getting the word out. Yeah.
Thank you, Nora. That was very helpful.
Any other questions?
Dave, yeah, you're on.
Dave, did you have a question?
I just wanted to thank Nora for a great presentation as usual.
Thanks, Dave. You and I have worked a lot on this stuff, so you've heard this a million times.
I would also say, Representative Menapace, in my experience, I live in a Sun Community Zone Park in Southington. We've got experience, Nora and I, working in places as disparate as Beacon Falls and Wyndham. It's kind of hit or miss from my perspective on whether an individual community is going to be receptive to the idea of manufactured home park ownership. We get resistance to create fair rent commissions in some of the towns we worked in to try to help residents fight back. So it's not monolithic either way. We've had some success and some failures as well. So I think Nora's right that there needs to be knowledge, particularly about the funding part of the process that CHAFA offers, which has never been tested, primarily because, like she said, the law has only been here for 2 years, and there's issues with it that we believe the landlords have been evading the intent of the statute, and we're gonna have to go back and fix it. I think similar to some of the stuff that's going on in places like Colorado and Maine, and we're gonna make that effort this coming year.
Thanks, Dave. And there's a question from George.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a footnote to Nora's presentation. It's good to see you, Nora. So I was, in full disclosure, I was the founding investor in Rock USA, and I happen to know that CDI is the second most prolific producer of resident-owned communities in the country after New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. But just to put this into national context, I've been tracking since 2015 the purchase of sites in manufactured housing communities around the country. And 30% of all the sites in manufactured housing communities around the country, that's 800,000 sites, have been transacted by REITs and private equity since 2015. And before 2015, it was a tiny share, and all of a sudden the REITs and the private equity found their way there. So it's about 550,000 units in REITs and about 550,000 sites and about 250,000 in private equity. There's about almost 50,000 manufactured housing communities in the country. And so Rock USA has converted 356. There's about another 300 or more that are also cooperative. So they're not part of the Rock USA network. But that leaves 49,000 other, manufactured housing communities that really do need the help to preserve that affordable stock. And the other footnote is that Rock USA, as a CDFI, has been doing this work essentially since 1984, but at scale since about 2002. They've never had a default, right? They've never had a default, which is an uncanny track record for a CDFI. And it just tells you something about the quality of that model in terms of its ability to preserve affordable housing in perpetuity. So you really need to take that seriously and do everything you can to facilitate the residents' right to purchase, right? And the optimal thing is, of course, a right of first refusal if you can kind of get it. So yeah. Anyway, sorry for the footnote, but anyway, I love the work of CDI. I live in Massachusetts, where I think we have the best right now, the best law in the country in terms of protections. So.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you, Nora. We're going to go now to Greg Payne from the Office of the Governor of Maine.
Hey there. Good morning. It's I guess it's about 11:45, so maybe I'll plan to just talk for about 10 minutes and then take some questions. I'm sorry I don't have slides. In an ideal world, I'd have had the time to pull that off, but I'm just going to walk through what's happened over the last few years here in Maine, much of it with Nora's help, because this has become sort of a top-tier concern among Republicans and Democrats alike. And just as background, I serve as Governor Mills' housing advisor in the Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, which is an office that she created when she took office in 2019 to do a little more in the way of proactive policy interventions on sort of big long-term problems. So I would just, the way I'm going to just talk about this is walk through sort of year by year for us what's happened. We became a little more familiar with the fact that there was an issue going on in our state with the acquisition of these parks by these large outside entities in 2022, 2023. And as we became more aware of it, we started having conversations about at least a notice law, so that people who lived in those parks would get an opportunity to understand that somebody was trying to buy their park, and give them a good faith opportunity to purchase it. So that law, this notice and opportunity for good faith negotiation, that passed in 2023 and was actually a bit of a difficult political lift, because I think at the time we weren't aware of just how bad this issue had become and was becoming. We also in 2024 passed the creation of a mobile home park preservation program and allocated $5 million to it, specifically to help resident-owned cooperatives purchase parks when they were put in a position to actually, when they win in a negotiation and have a chance to buy a park. That was kind of quickly put to use in preserving several parks with about 450 units. And so it kind of was a proof of concept that happened fairly rapidly, that gained a lot of support. I think what happened from there is that the notice law really became a catalyst for us, because it opened our eyes to just how prevalent the issue was and how many of these firms were coming in and doing this. Between September of 23 and December of 24, as these notices started being, not just to the residents, but also importantly to Maine State Housing Authority. So there was some central collection of these notices. We became aware of, just in that 15 months, about 500 more units that were, being purchased by these large firms, which tend to come in with a particular model, which is a predatory model, frankly, as I think folks have been discussing, when you're talking about people on fixed incomes who can't kind of vote with their feet and move out, when rents get increased. So I think we all just sort of, our eyes were opened by the fact that there were all of these people with very modest incomes who were all of a sudden at risk. And that led to the most recent legislative session in 2025, at which we wanted to do, we wanted to take action to further protect people. And so one of them is a bill, LD 1016, which created a new fee on the purchase of mobile home parks. And that fee is pretty hefty. It's about $10,000 per licensed lot. That is significant, obviously, especially when you're talking about larger parks. We also exempted from that fee every purchaser that was not a high-end purchaser. And we were defining that as more than $50 million in net assets. So if the purchaser has less than $50 million in net assets, then they don't have to worry about that fee. But we also said, okay, if you go ahead and pay that fee anyway, you purchase it despite that being added to your pro forma, if your deal actually is still now feasible, even adding that fee in, well, if you pay it, then it goes into that mobile home park preservation fund, which is used to help support resident-owned cooperatives. That bill went into effect this past September. In addition to that, we did establish a right of first refusal law with Nora's help, kind of understanding what pieces and parts of various rights of first refusal laws in other states seem to be working, what needed to be added to it. And that passed as well. We provided more money into the preservation fund and passed some tax incentives that would encourage owners to sell specifically to mission-based nonprofits and resident cooperatives if and when they get to the point that they want to sell. We are getting the sense that the combination of the new fee and the right of first refusal are having some impact in the marketplace, that there are purchasers who were ready to go ahead and use their predatory model on some additional victims, that fee managed to scare off. And so we'll see if that continues. But, I think what has happened over time is that the governor, Republicans in the legislature, Democrats in the legislature, independents in the legislature have found this approach that was going on with these firms to be so obnoxious and objectionable that it has a whole lot of bipartisan support to stop it. And so, hopefully these things will continue to prevent additional parks from being purchased here. But we do still have the problem of people who are already living in parks in Maine that have been purchased by those entities, and the rent increases that are continuing to happen in those parks. We've had resistance. The governor's resistant to. Many folks are resistant to instituting statewide rent control. But we are trying to figure out other ways to help support residents of parks generally, and to support the more kind of mom and pop owners that generally are not trying to be predators. And so the way we're trying to do that in the coming legislative session is with a focus on infill and expansion at existing parks in exchange for restrictive covenants. So we would say to park owners who are living off a pretty small profit margin, here we're willing to give you subsidy, we're willing to give you reduced construction loan interest terms. To add new units in on land you already own, generally, you can expand or you can do infill. We'll do that. You just have to make sure that the homes that you're putting on there are affordable. You're going to have to assign a restrictive covenant around that. We also are trying to work on our titling laws to allow residents themselves to be able to access real estate mortgages rather than personal property loans, so they get additional consumer protections and better terms. That's another piece we're going to be working on in the coming session. We also are just trying to revisit our regulatory framework more generally to be more responsive to what's going on in these parks than our current infrastructure allows for. So I will stop there. I guess I would generally just say, again, this has been a bipartisan exercise. It has generally been revolving around the idea of trying to deflect off corporate owners because the nature of what they're trying to do is that model that we object to, generally speaking. And at the same time, we want to support resident co-ops. We want to support ownership models that are different from that, which existed for decades in Maine. And we want to support residents by helping lower their own housing costs, put more money in their pockets. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions folks might have.
Thank you so much, Greg. Dave? Oh, you have to unmute, Dave.
Yeah, thank you so much, Greg. This is a very valuable presentation. My first question is, our session starts in early February. Will you be willing to repeat this presentation for us in our next legislative session? Because we're going to get a lot of pushback, but I do think, based upon some of the things that happened last year down here, I do think we have a chance on getting some of this enacted. So can you come back for us?
Oh, certainly. I mean, and my experience with all this has been too that other states have had things that they've tried that have worked, and it's been really valuable for us to hear about that, and absolutely more than happy to do the same.
I did have one question on your support for the mom and pops, trying to keep them from incentivizing them from selling to one of these private equity groups. Is some of the funding you're talking about include infrastructure improvement? Because I've heard from a lot of these smaller communities that are struggling with having to do infrastructure that's 50 or 60 years old. Is that part of your plan up there?
Yeah, and that plan again is a bit in motion. I have a report that I have to give to the legislature on December 31st that details a lot of this stuff, and then that'll become the basis for legislation that the relevant committee in Maine will be working on. But this infill piece, the idea would be that owners could access the better construction financing and perhaps subsidy that could be applied to either the preparation of a pad or to infrastructure needs that need to be taken care of. But again, there would be a restrictive covenant that would need to be part of that deal, essentially. So if we're going to give, taxpayer money, we got to make sure we're getting something in return. But I do think the idea is either units or infrastructure needs that have to be dealt with.
Thank you. And your program, I noticed I don't know where I got this, but it's a summary of the laws that you passed. It says that LD 554, which is the capital gains credit,
yeah,
that would be applied not only to mobile home parks but to apartment complexes, cooperatives, and municipal housing. So that's something that could be applied on a wider basis maybe as a sales technique down here in Connecticut as well, if we try to do that.
Yeah, I think we had originally kind of come up with this specifically in the sense of a mobile home park co-op. And then other folks working on housing issues kind of pointed out, I think what you're pointing out, said this doesn't need to be just that narrow. It can be used for other kind of important housing creation as well, or supporting housing, affordable housing as well. And so there's actually a fixed bill that is getting submitted to the legislature for this coming session that'll make sure it is available for the kind of wider array of housing co-ops and not just mobile home park co-ops.
Has anybody actually bid on that? Any investors taken advantage of that particular statute?
So far, I believe that Nora, correct me if I'm wrong. There's a park that Nora and I and others have been working to try to help protect, that they're still in the middle of a legal battle. And I think they were eyeing this as one of the things they hope would make happen. But this, I think, just also went into effect this past September. So I'm not aware of any park having used it in the intervening, 3 months or so.
Last question. You had one of the earlier presenters referred to constitutional issues. Have you had any of the park associations or any landlords file legal challenges against any of these statutes?
No, I mean, I will say when we propose them, of course, everybody claims something is unconstitutional because it scares people off. We immediately talked with our Attorney General's office, and and they gave us plenty of comfort that there was not a constitutional problem here. That so because based on the feedback we got from the Attorney General's office, we went forward with this, and we're all feeling comfortable. And no, nobody has filed a lawsuit over it, probably because they've come to the same conclusion.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Menapace.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Payne. I was wondering, because the focus of the group is to try and see what we can do to help municipalities. But I was wondering if you all have run into issues or if this is a uniquely Connecticut problem, of people trying to claim that the state is overreaching by trying to help in this way. Because I think this, these all seem like really great resources, and we've seen on the local level that we often have been able to get some very cooperative decisions. I know in my own town, East Lyme, we were able to form a fair rent commission, and that was a very bipartisan decision to do that. But it's been very difficult in other places, and I think that's kind of the purpose of this one, is to try and figure out what we can do for those municipalities. And we don't want it to feel like the state is coming in and telling everybody what they need to do. So has that been a problem in Maine at all, or?
I think for the most part, with the things that we have done, we've done a lot of zoning and land use stuff that municipal officials have said is going too far. It's a completely separate can of worms. On this stuff, no, the municipalities, I think, have been very happy to get this state level tool to try to prevent more of these parks. Because what's happening at the local level in many of these places is that the parks already owned by these entities, and sometimes, frankly, some of the non-corporate entities too, are increasing their lot rent significantly, and they're coming to the municipality saying, "Please help us." The residents are, and so the towns have been struggling with, what do we do here? Should we pass a moratorium on rent increases? Should we pass rent control? I will say we've created a model municipal rent control ordinance that we're making available to them. But I don't see a state level rent control law passing. So I think that municipalities have not reached out to us with any sense of what you're doing here is overreaching. I think the only overreach, I guess, we hear about is sometimes from owners who say you've gone too far, and don't hold us accountable for the predatory actions of the few or something. And that's kind of one piece of feedback we've heard. And the other overreach kind of discussion that sometimes happen is you know, we would sometimes get some of our Republican friends saying, okay, you're doing too much, you're regulating too much. And then, of course, what's happened is these parks are probably more in red districts than they are blue. And what happens is then a park has this happen to them that's in a red district, and those Republicans kind of have a different feeling about it after their own constituents become victims of this approach. So that's been the kind of only two contexts in which overreach, I think, has generally been brought to us.
Yeah. And if I can just follow up with that, I don't know how much time we have for that. It's just, like I said, the goal of this was we're trying to make sure that we're providing the resources to these municipalities. And that is regardless of there's no political affiliation associated with that. We just want to be able to do what we can because of exactly what you're saying. Like, we don't want that to be happening after the fact. We don't want to be looking for the resources after it's already happened. It's already been acquired. Right. And I guess I was speaking into what some of the previous speakers is. Have you been found that like there's been a audience for things like education, essentially forums for these municipalities? Has there been an audience for or a groups that want these? Because it sounds to me like, obviously in Maine, there's a lot of desire to get some of these, this model municipal language out there on it. And I just want to make sure that seems to be the case from what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, like the rent control language, we've gotten a lot of outreach on that. And we're happy to provide that. I think that, people started talking about this with Nora too. I think one of the next things I think we want to think about is what resources could we help bring to residents to either lower their costs or help them further with organizing to be co-ops themselves. I will say one other thing in the big picture that I think was going to be and ends up being helpful for municipalities and residents alike too, along with current owners, is that if what's happened here predominantly by the passage of our new fee and our right of first refusal law, I would say that those two are a really important duo that is helping, I think, to have some positive effect already. But owners have also made a fair case to us to say, well, we can't, if we can't cash in when we are ready to sell. We've owned this for 40 years and we're ready to sell. And, when we try to find a buyer, the only folks who want to buy are the predators. So what are we supposed to do? And we say, well, you could talk to your residents. Sometimes it's not a good fit. The residents don't want to do it. Sometimes it's pretty small park. And I think it is a fair question that they pose to us, which is there's got to be more buyers in the marketplace. And so that is one of the things I think we want to be thinking about next too, is perhaps a mission-based organization that doesn't exist in Maine. Maybe it does in Connecticut right now, but that could fill the hole that is, created by warding off the corporate equity firm types in a world where, maybe there aren't as many current mom and pop owners who want to buy, whatever. There needs to be some kind of additional buyer in the marketplace who would offer a fair price. So that is the other piece I'd put out there that I think municipalities too would love to see happen, so that this is a market that actually, can continue to operate with buyers and sellers the way it has for decades without necessarily, putting so many people at risk the way it is most recently.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. We're going to move to our last presenter, who is George McCarthy, the president and CEO of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Thank you, George.
Thanks. And I will share my screen here. Oh, sharing is not turned on. Can you let me share my screen?
One moment, please.
Oh, one moment, please. Okay, here we go. Let's see this one.
If you could please also share this presentation with me afterwards, we need it for our records.
Right. I sent you a link to it. If it didn't work, I will send another one, but I will do that. Hang on, let me do this. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll have to talk fast because I know we'll run out of time, but so Who Owns America is a data platform that's unique. It has every single parcel of land in the United States, and we have tons of information about that, both about the parcels, and we've overlaid tons of other information, including open corporate data, which allows us to kind of track corporate purchases of residential properties. And so what we do is we use it now to tell a story of what's going on land in the United States. And just so you know, we've used it to tell all sorts of stories about like investors buying mobile home parks, like you've just been talking about, or about we buy ugly houses, people who are actually kind of front men for a lot of really deep capital players trying to buy up the single family housing stock in the United States. And so our role is really to just provide help to local governments to just understand what's going on with their housing stock, and then to provide some ideas about what to do about it. So we did a recent report on corporate ownership of residential parcels in urban counties. We looked at the 500 urban counties in the United States, and we tracked that to show that, and you can download this from our website. It's www.lincolninst.edu. About slightly over 8% of all residential parcels in the United States are now owned by corporations, on average in counties, right? And the median is around a little bit over 8. The mean is a little bit bigger than that, about 8.4. But that's is that a lot? I don't know, because when you look at it, it's not uniformly distributed around the country, right? In the New York County, where Manhattan, more than 50% of all residential parcels are owned by corporations, but that's kind of an outlier. But in an odd place like St. Louis, and if you look at the report, St. Louis is in that report. Over 20% of the residential land in properties in St. Louis are owned by private investors, right? By corporate investors, not just by private investors. And you can see some of the leading counties across the United States. And so not only is the purchase of residential properties by corporations not evenly distributed around the United States, it's not evenly distributed within counties. So that what we've seen is a lot of heaping, a lot of concentration in low and moderate income communities and communities of color. And that's a problem, right? So I looked at Connecticut yesterday just to see what Connecticut looks like. In Connecticut, most of the counties, you guys don't really have counties, I know, but anyway, what you call counties, or you would call counties, you hover around the mean for the country in your big counties, and then in the smaller counties, you have lower rates of corporate ownership. But one of the things that really struck me when I started looking at it is there's a lot of other investors playing in the market in Connecticut, not just the corporate investors, right? And so if you look at, like, I don't know, the Northwest Hills area, right? 27% of the Northwest Hills are owned by non-corporate investors, which might be like Airbnbs, or it might be second homes sometimes that are then listed. But what it means is that there's a lot of the housing stock is really pulled off the market and not available to people, and particularly first-time home buyers, if you care about promoting first-time home ownership, right? And so just to give you a sense of what that means in Connecticut, I got 2 maps I created last night, or they were created for me, in truth. And just to show you what New Haven looks like. So in New Haven, every red dot on here is a corporate-owned property, right? And every gray dot, and the gray dots are hard to see, but the gray dots are in almost on the entire rest of the map. Any area that is a high minority density area is shaded in green, and the deeper the shade of green, the higher density of minorities live in that area. And you can see that there's this very strong spatial correlation between the purchase of those properties and the race of the area, right? Particularly if you look at kind of the western area of New Haven, you'll notice that, and this is anomalous, but it's not anomalous everywhere. There's a big heap of properties in the middle of the map that's in a predominantly white area. That's student housing owned by Yale, right? And so That too is not uncommon in most of college towns. There's a very high percentage of investor-owned properties, typically owned by either investors renting to students or by the colleges themselves renting to students. But this is what Bridgeport looks like. In Bridgeport, you'll see that it doesn't have a huge university that's buying up a bunch of properties, but there's a gigantic amount of heaping around the very high density census tracts that are close to the urban core, right? And anyway, let's just say there's a lot, right? So what I told Jeff was that I would kind of get you into the mind of the investors to understand why this is going on and why there's so much activity going on in the low and moderate income neighborhoods, right? So the economics are this, and the reason the economics work now and they didn't work 15 years ago is because we've now cracked the code on property management for scattered site property management. And that was actually cracked by Blackstone. Blackstone bought up tens of thousands of non-performing mortgages from lenders, and they got control of the properties, and they were proposing to flip those properties in 2 to 3 years when house prices improved after the great financial crisis. But turns out property values didn't come back fast enough, and they were left holding tens of thousands of properties. So they actually created their own scattered site property management company called Invitation Homes, which today is the largest owner of single family homes in the country, over 100,000 homes. But anyway, so the economics are this, right? For every $500 of net monthly rental income you get, if you capitalize that to a property value, the property value will capitalize to $100,000 per $500 of rent, right? So for this example, I said, so a 3-bedroom home that rents for $2,000 and produces $15,000 net income is worth $300,000, right? And in some markets, like your markets, you know, there's a lot, rents are a lot higher than $2,000 for a 3-family home, right? But the point is, there's a lot of homes on the market that would rent for over, say, $1,500 net rent that you could buy for $300,000 in Connecticut. And I could show you that in another time if you're really interested, because I've been looking at different jurisdictions to see where the homes are that you would want to buy. But the rest of the kind of the mentality of investors, and I got this from an investor sheet that they were pitching, private equity people were pitching to build a private equity fund to buy single family homes, right? And this might be hard to see, but I will definitely share this with you so you can kind of look at it more closely. If you look across the top, it tells you what the investors are thinking. And the first thing that they care about is the price to rent ratio, which means what's it cost to buy a house and what will it rent for, right? And the lower the price to rent ratio, the better it is for the investor because it costs them less to buy a rentable unit. And if you see where these investors are looking at, these are the most investable places in the country, right? And Cleveland, Ohio is number one. Now, you wouldn't think, you know, private equity would be going to Cleveland, Ohio, because Cleveland has been a kind of a depressed market for a long time. But the funny thing about Cleveland is the acquisition prices are low and the rents are relatively high. But then the other things I look at, property taxes, state income tax, the city population. But if you look all the way over, tenant laws and flood risk are something that they look at really, really carefully as well. So the more landlord friendly the tenant laws, the more likely it is that private equity is going to go to buy these homes, right? Now that just tells you also what the policy response should be, which is to protect tenants. But the other thing is, you're going to protect tenants. You're not necessarily going to protect the housing stock if you don't find other ways to kind of change the economics of the investor purchasing kind of equation, right? So what can we do? We have about 15 policy ideas about what places can do. And one of them, of course, is to insulate a significant share of the housing market from speculative investment. The predominant way is through permanently affordable housing, like community land trust, resident-owned communities, like you saw in the manufactured housing space, limited equity co-ops, public housing, deed-restricted properties, or even to temporarily restrict them, right? But the big thing is to change the economics of purchasing by changing tax and other kinds of policies, or just to build more housing on public land that you would not make available to investors, right? And we've been helping jurisdictions do all of those things. But just to give you a sense of what we've been providing in terms of advice to different jurisdictions, the first thing we tell them is to create a rental registry so you know what's being rented and what it's being rented for, the characteristics of the unit, which is really kind of fundamental anyway to knowing what's going on with your housing stock, because how do you know how to protect renters if you don't know who's renting and what they're renting for? Moreover, how are you going to know where the short-term rentals are? They're really pulling all sorts of housing off out of your housing stock and making it available for people who are whatever, tourists or anything else, but not available for the families that need a place to live, right? We heard about right of first refusal. This is something that some jurisdictions are thinking about giving right of first refusal on every transaction to the public sector first. So anybody that wants to sell, the public sector gets another look to make sure that they don't want to buy it, as opposed to allowing somebody else, an investor, to buy it. You curtail short-term rentals using inspections, hotel taxes, any other, there's a variety of different strategies. You do aggressive code enforcement. And one of the things we've seen is there's a very high spatial correlation between code violations and absentee landlords. And that doesn't surprise anybody, I'm sure, right? Standard setting, rent stabilization, safety and soundness requirements. When we talked to New York, we were doing some work in the Hudson Valley in New York. The governor's office talked to us, and then they went ahead and proposed a 75-day exclusion period to give home buyers a fair shot ahead of investors. And the reason this is important is because last year, 1/3 of all transactions in the single-family market were cash-only transactions. And it's very unlikely that a first-time home buyer is going to be buying a home with cash. You can imagine that, right? So the idea is that to give somebody a fair shot to put the financing together, everything else, you got to give them some time to be able to do that. And so Governor Hochul in New York said, well, let's talk to the legislature about putting in this 75-day exclusion period. But other things you do in one of our members of another one of our networks in Cincinnati, the Port of Cincinnati, actually went ahead and started to outbid private equity to buy homes. And now they acquired about 194 homes in what they call the Care Homes Initiative. And now they're getting out and they're buying, they're improving, and then they're reselling the homes to low mod home buyers as a way to get more owner occupants into Cincinnati and into their neighborhoods. Or scaling permanent affordability by building and scaling community land trusts on publicly owned land. And we've been able to identify more than 250,000 acres of publicly owned land in highly desirable urban locations in the United States with, served by transit and all that could be used to build permanently affordable housing and help to, deal with this problem. But also, to subsidize the conversion of the existing affordable stock to co-ops or CLTs, impose inclusionary housing. There's a bunch of different ideas, right? And then in terms of other local ideas, property tax escalators, differential property tax rates where you treat rental properties as commercial if they have large enough portfolios, reassess property value for rental properties, not using the comp method, but using the capitalization method for cash flow. And these are all maybe obscure. I can tell you what they mean. Or and undoing the SALT limits, which is actually part of the new housing bill, which is good at the federal level. Anyway, those are some of the ideas. I will stop sharing now just to kind of, I know I went through that fast, but I wanted to give you kind of a sense of, what we're doing and what we're seeing around the country and kind of how that kind of shapes up in Connecticut. As it turns out in Connecticut, what you're going to see is, even though there's not a gigantic share of the housing market that is owned by corporations, where they own it, they own a large share. So they're owning 50% of a neighborhood, right? And when a neighborhood moves from being owner-occupant, concentrated to rental concentrated, it changes the entire character of the neighborhood, right? And we've got, empirical evidence showing that renters behave very different politically than homeowners. Homeowners are more likely to vote. They're more likely to participate in PTAs and lots of other things. They have a stake in their neighborhood that you won't see with renters. And so I think it would be a tragedy if we went from being a homeowner nation to a renter nation. And I think it would play out really, really badly for most of the households because we have no control over rents. And rents have been going up since COVID at double-digit rates in most places. So, all right, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, George. Questions?
You're on a much more macro level, I think, than most of us are. I have a question. Like we have a corporate investor that just took ownership of a 7-park mobile home portfolio here in Connecticut, who's not shown their Delaware corporation with a New York State address. It's a post office box in a little tiny town outside of Newburgh, New York. We don't know who it is. Is there a way to track those people and find out who they are?
Yeah, and in fact, that's what we do. So what we do is we use open corporate data and SEC filings, depending on the nature of the corporation that owns it, to figure out who they are, right? And one of the things we've been able to do when we actually look at corporate ownership is we look at investors who buy the properties and have out of state or sometimes you have investors in the same state that just own a bunch of different properties. And the way you identify them is that their mailing address is different than the address of the property. And then we go to the open corporate data and we start to triangulate to figure out who they are and what the source of the capital is, right? So when you look at the Edgar filings and SEC, or you look at the open corporate data, we're able to do a lot of that sleuthing and get all the way back to the original source of capital is buying these homes. Which is also how you know that We Buy Ugly Homes is not, just somebody that wants to make a quick buck. They're actually just agents for other bigger capital sources, right?
So how would I go about trying to find out who the people are in a little town in New York State?
Well, I mean, if you want to do it yourself, you have to go to the open corporate data is open, right? So you go to open corporate and you might want to just ask us. I don't know. You have to, if you can identify the parks, we could probably help you figure it out, right?
I can do that.
Yeah.
Sean?
Thanks, George. Thank you so much for that presentation. You had to cover a lot of ground really quickly, so I appreciate that. But there are a lot of those policies that I was really interested in learning more about. But one that seemed a little relevant to some of the things that have recently passed in Connecticut is building housing on public land. Connecticut, there's some language in a recent bill that passed that allowed the Connecticut Department of Housing Act as a developer, essentially the state housing authority. And I'm wondering if you've come across other examples of that. And sort of related to that is the policy around right of first refusal to the public sector. That's really intriguing. I can imagine that at the local level for some of our cities, those maps you showed of Bridgeport, New Haven, you probably see the same thing in Hartford, if not worse. Are there places you've seen that happen? Examples of that yet?
So the state of Colorado, they introduced legislation to give all local governments the right of first refusal on any property that's transacted. As you can imagine, as soon as it was introduced, a multi-million-dollar campaign was launched by the realty and the property developer industry to squash it, right? Because they didn't like it. And what's funny about it is, and they actually tried to challenge it on constitutional grounds, saying a right of first refusal is a taking. But that's really hard argument to make, because what are you taking from someone if you're offering to pay them more than the highest offer they've received, and if you're just doing business in good faith, right? So that didn't fly, but as it turns out, they were successful at squashing it. But that's not because in Colorado, it took them 3 tries to get the right of first refusal for manufactured housing communities too, but they got it now, right? So it's just a matter of time. And there's other places that have been talking about it. The first pass on the right of first refusal is to say, if we put $1 of public subsidy into any unit, then we're going to include with that a right of first refusal, right? And then if you don't want to take the subsidy, good, but otherwise you have to give us a right of first refusal. And that's like buying it, right? But in any case, that's probably the most radical way you can go, right? And it's most likely to raise hackles because other people are going to find that as an impediment to their trade, right? But and there's other ways to get around that, but it's a good it's a good threat, a credible threat to make anyway, even if you want to get other things and just you say, well, maybe we'll just go after the right of first refusal and then all our troubles will be solved, right? Yeah. So the other thing about building on public land, so we just launched a campaign, the Public Lands Campaign. It's called, now I can't, PLACE is the acronym, Public Land for All Communities and the Environment. And the idea is we're working with local governments around the country to find ways to map out, and we know, all the publicly owned land, then to help them figure out the suitability of that land for different purposes. Is it best for housing? Is it best for nature-based solutions? Is it best left as conservation land, whatever, right? And then working with them to come up with a plan for how they would actually develop housing or other kinds of nature-based solutions like stormwater retention, those kinds of things, right? So that's just getting launched, but we're working to the extent that anybody wants to work with us. We've been putting out open offers to work with teams of people from different places who actually want to go down that road with us. And the idea would be that we want to find somebody who's willing to be either an affordable housing developer or a steward for affordable housing, like a community land trust, working with somebody in the public sector side that will be able to identify the right kind of land, transact it. And the transactions that we're promoting is a long-term lease, not sale of the public land, right? Mm-hmm. And then getting the housing developed on the land. And so if you're interested, and if you find people, jurisdictions in Connecticut that want to go down that road, you should have them talk to us. Right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, we're also documenting cases where they've made a really, really effective use of public land, right? Like Burlington, Vermont, where the Champlain Housing Trust has been a major recipient of public land, and they've used it really, really effectively. Or the Urban Land Conservancy in Denver, where they've done the same thing on public land, right? But we have a bunch of different examples that we're starting to develop to tell that story, to kind of motivate people, to let them know that it is actually possible to do this. It's not pie in the sky, right?
Representative Menapace.
On that note, George, I just had wanted to know, what have you found to be the most effective tool in trying to bring people in on this and see the efficacy and the benefit of doing this and using these resources and, I suppose, having these resources?
So when you say doing this, you mean building housing on public land or trying to get ahead of private investors?
Yeah, trying to get ahead of private investors. Yeah. Well,
so, I mean, the most effective thing so far is actually being able to get eyes on your own housing stock and create a rental registry so you know what's going on, right? And that has 100 other benefits. Just being able to know, for safety and soundness of the renters, knowing who's renting, what they're renting for, and the condition of the units, right? You can also put it on a kind of a routine inspection basis where you can actually find out how the units are doing, right? And after that, it's actually really starting to look at the code enforcement and other kinds of tax treatments, because the first thing you got to do is you got to protect the residents, and then you got to then protect the housing stock, right? Now, the efforts that they're doing in Cincinnati are meritorious, but you got to have some fairly deep-pocketed public authorities that are going to have the money to go buy whole inventories of properties and then stabilize them and sell them, right? And the Port of Cincinnati, which is not really a port, it's actually a redevelopment agency for the city of Cincinnati. If you know Ohio, the enabling legislation for ports is the exact same enabling legislation for redevelopment authorities. So they just said, well, we just call them all ports. So I don't know why. But anyway, that's weird. But so I would say those are the things that you want to start thinking about, and then start going down to more aggressive methods. But until you know the story about what's going on, I mean, there's really nothing you can do, right? So we were working with the Baltimore City Council, and we did this, and we actually mapped this out by council district, and it actually led to an almost violent city council meeting where residents from certain city council districts were really, really angry about what was going on in their neighborhood, and they were wondering why the city council wasn't doing anything about it. There are some neighborhoods where almost 70% of the housing stock had already been bought up by private investors, right?
Thank you.
Yep. Well, I know we're past time, and look, I'm perfectly willing to talk to you guys again. I do this all the time. My presentation is usually a lot longer, as you can probably imagine, and I could go even deeper into some of the topics. I just put together the maps last night for Connecticut. We could look more closely at Connecticut, but should you want to think more about this and what the state can do to incentivize localities to think about this is something we could talk about as well down the line.
Jeff?
I just wanted to say, it being 12:35, we're just really indebted to everyone who spoke to us today. It was did a great job of packing in what we were looking for into a short amount of time with not a lot of lead time and us asking you to be here, and we're really appreciative of that. Our next steps are putting together a report with the task force collective recommendations for policy solutions, and then taking it on so that Representative Mendenpace and his colleagues can do what they wish with it. But they would conduct public hearings in late February, early March, that period for this session. And I think different members of the task force will participate in different capacities. And I understand given your respective positions and where all of you sit, some of you could sign right up for the public hearings, others would need to be invited to consult, but we will pass those details along as part of our eventual report.
Fabulous. All right, well, you guys have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Really
so
appreciate your
much.
time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.
So before we adjourn, I think for the task force, we just need to figure out our next meeting, which probably makes sense for early January. I think it's probably best to figure it out via email. Does that work for everybody?
Just Ms. Are we able to get an extension? Because I believe our original proposals, we had to submit a thing by December 31st.
So you may have missed this, but the housing co-chairs and vice chairs approved an extension through January 23rd.
I think I
so-
must have missed that, but I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yes, so we don't have to spend our holidays writing this.
We got 3 yeses, one abstention so far. So I'm going to take it as a go ahead from D&D and from housing.
Thank you.
But yeah, we would look at, Sarah, you're thinking first week of January at some point, and we'll just I think the best thing to do, and we'll include Lisa and Ben on this too, is to just send in your non-availability for that week and take it from there.
Okay.
Great. Thank you both.
All right, thanks. Sarah, do you need a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All right. All in favor.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy
All right, you
holidays,
too.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.